Veteran buys haunted cabin for $500. Dog finds a locked secret that changed everything. The storm had swallowed the mountains whole. Outside, the wind screamed through the pines of northern Colorado, carrying fine shards of ice that struck the cabin's windows like thrown gravel. Inside, Ethan Cole sat in front of a weak fire, his breath visible in the thin air. The small log cabin he had bought for $500 was supposed to be his fresh start, a place where silence could drown out the echoes of war. He rubbed his hands near the flames, watching them tremble from exhaustion more than cold. His service dog, Axel, lay beside him, head resting on his front paws. The German shepherd's coat shimmered silver and tan in the flickering light. 9 years of service had carved discipline into every line of his body, but his eyes, amber, intelligent, and endlessly patient, still carried a softness that Ethan depended on more than he admitted. For hours, the only sound was the wind clawing at the walls and the soft pop of burning pine. Then, without warning, Axel's head snapped up. His ears pricked forward, nostrils flaring. A low rumble started in his throat, deep and steady. "What is it, buddy?" Ethan whispered. Axel rose, muscles coiled tight. He wasn't looking at the door or the window, his gaze fixed on the stone fireplace. He took 2 slow steps forward and let out a bark that shook the small room. It wasn't frantic. It was sharp, measured, a warning. Ethan frowned. "Easy, boy. It's just the wind." But Axel barked again, then began to paw at the stone base of the hearth. His claws scraped against the old mortar, sending out a piercing metallic sound that made Ethan's skin crawl. "Axel!" Ethan snapped. "Stop!" The dog ignored him. He lowered his head and started sniffing the cracks between the stones, whining in short bursts, his tail stiff and low. It wasn't fear. It was focus. The same stance Ethan had seen back in Afghanistan when Axel had found a buried IED seconds before detonation. Ethan's pulse quickened. He set the poker aside and crouched beside the dog. "What are you seeing, huh?" Axel didn't look at him. His paw scraped again at one particular slab of stone, a large, flat one, darker than the rest. Ethan leaned closer, brushing away the dust. The mortar there looked newer. A chill rippled through him. "You've got to be kidding me," he murmured. The wind outside rose to a shriek, rattling the windows. Axel whined louder now, pressing his nose against that same slab. Then he stopped, ears tilting towards the wall as if listening to something beneath the floor. Ethan held his breath. For a moment, he thought he heard it too, a faint, hollow thump, like something shifting deep below. He stood quickly, heart pounding. "There's nothing down there," he told himself, though his voice didn't sound convincing. He grabbed a flashlight from the table and shone it over the fireplace. The beam caught on a small, irregular line along the edge of the slab. The stone wasn't part of the foundation. It was separate. A lid. He swallowed hard. Axel barked again, sharp and impatient this time. His body trembled with urgency. "All right," Ethan said under his breath. "You win." He fetched his crowbar from the supply crate. The metal felt icy in his gloved hand. Crouching down, he wedged the bar into the seam and pushed. Nothing moved. He repositioned, sweat forming despite the cold. He pushed again, harder. The stone gave a low groan. Then, with a sudden crack, the seal broke. Ethan froze. Axel stopped barking. Both stared at the faint line of black space that had appeared beneath the slab. The air coming from it was colder than the storm outside and carried a strange, metallic scent, like old rust and damp earth. "Jesus," Ethan whispered. He lifted the stone fully and slid it aside. Beneath it was a narrow cavity, just large enough for a person to crawl into. His flashlight beam revealed a wooden box half buried in dust, along with something else, cloth, shredded and brown. At first he thought it was a tarp. Then he saw what looked like the curve of a sleeve. His stomach turned. He lowered the light. The sleeve ended in the outline of a human hand, long gone dry and dark. Axel let out a deep, guttural growl. Ethan stumbled backward, hitting the table. The flashlight beam trembled across the wall. The storm outside howled louder, as if the mountain itself was reacting to the discovery. He stood there for several seconds, forcing his breath to steady. He had seen death before, too much of it. But not like this, not buried under his own floor. Finally he knelt again, pulling the box out. Its hinges were rusted, but the lock was missing. Inside, wrapped in plastic that had yellowed with age, were notebooks. Dozens of them. The top one bore a name, written in neat black ink. Henry Porter. Ethan remembered the name. A journalist. 15 years ago, a story about his disappearance had floated through the news like a ghost. The wind banged against the door, startling him. He snapped the box shut and looked at Axel. The dog's fur stood on end, ears twitching toward the sound. "Someone's out there," Ethan muttered. Axel moved to the door, silent now, every muscle alert. Ethan grabbed his flashlight and stepped closer to the window. Through the frost-coated glass, the storm was a white wall. But in that moving haze, a shape flickered. Tall, human, motionless. His heart slammed against his ribs. He blinked, looked again, and the figure was gone. Axel growled softly, nose pressed against the door. Ethan took a long, steady breath. He reached down, rested a hand on the dog's head. "Whatever this is," he whispered, "we're not leaving it buried." The cabin groaned as the wind shifted direction. Outside, the snow thickened into a blinding curtain. Inside, the fire flickered weakly, reflecting off the open cavity at the hearth. The hollow below seemed to breathe in rhythm with the storm, as if something far older than either of them had just been awakened. Axel stayed standing, facing the door, eyes unblinking. He didn't bark again. He didn't have to. Ethan already knew. Whatever secret this place held, they had just crossed the line where silence ends and truth begins. Morning crept into the cabin like a hesitant guest. The storm had eased, but left behind a world of silence, the kind that pressed against the chest until breathing felt intrusive. Ethan Cole stood by the window, a chipped mug of coffee warming his hands. The snow outside lay untouched, smooth and perfect, except for a single set of paw prints that looped the porch and disappeared into the trees. Axel sat near the hearth, head tilted, amber eyes tracking Ethan's every movement. His coat shimmered silver in the pale light, the color of smoke and frost. His ears twitched at every sound, the slow crack of the fire, the creak of the old rafters. The dog's calm wasn't stillness. It was vigilance. Even in rest, Axel was ready. "You were right last night," Ethan murmured, his voice hoarse from cold and lack of sleep. "There's something off about this place." Axel blinked, slow and deliberate, as if he understood. Maybe he did. Ethan sat beside him on the rough floorboards. His hand found the thick fur on the dog's neck, the motion habitual and grounding. It pulled him back to the dust and heat of Afghanistan, to the day he had first met Axel in the wreckage of an old compound. The shepherd had been leaner then, his coat darker, his eyes wilder. Ethan had been on his third deployment, part of a bomb disposal team operating in Kandahar. He could still smell the heat that clung to the air that day, the bitter tang of cordite and burnt sand. They'd been clearing a market road when a local boy had run towards them, waving frantically. Before Ethan could react, Axel had lunged, shoving him to the ground just as the buried IED detonated a few yards away. The shockwave knocked the breath from his lungs, sent shards of rock slicing across his face. When the dust cleared, Axel was standing over him, ears flat, trembling, but alive. From that moment, the bond was forged in something deeper than training. It was survival shared, one human, one animal, both scarred by the same noise. Years later, after Ethan's unit dissolved and Axel was retired from service, they had both come back stateside, broken in ways no one could see. Ethan's nights were full of the sound of distant explosions that no longer existed, and Axel would pace the room before dawn, restless and alert, searching for threats that weren't there. They moved from place to place, cheap motels, rented trailers, a string of forgotten towns, until they reached Aspen Ridge. The town was small, folded between snow-capped peaks and thick forest. A handful of wooden storefronts lined the main street, their faded, signs hinting at busier times long gone. People here noticed everything, and they noticed Ethan the moment he arrived. He stopped at the diner on his first morning, still stiff from a night sleeping in the truck. Inside, the smell of bacon and coffee tangled in the air. Conversations quieted when he walked in. A waitress with kind eyes brought him a menu and a wary smile. "You're the one who bought the old Miller cabin," she said after a moment. "People around here been talking." "Guess I made the front page," Ethan replied, half smiling. "More like the obituaries," she said softly, setting the coffee pot down. "That place has been empty 15 years. They say it's cursed." He looked up. "You believe that?" She hesitated. "I don't know what I believe, but folks who went up there didn't stay long." Her gaze flicked toward Axel, who was waiting quietly by the door, his leash coiled loose in Ethan's hand. "That your dog?" "Yeah," Ethan said. "His name's Axel. He's beautiful," she said. Then, lowering her voice, "You'd better listen to him if he starts acting strange. Animals know things before people do." When Ethan left, conversations resumed behind him, low and hurried. Outside, Axel waited in the snow, watching every passerby with calm detachment. People crossed to the other side of the street rather than walk near him. It wasn't fear of the dog, it was fear of what he represented. Soldiers didn't come to Aspen Ridge looking for peace. They came when there was nowhere left to go. By noon, Ethan drove back toward the cabin, the road winding through evergreens heavy with snow. He glanced at Axel, who sat upright in the passenger seat, ears twitching at each shift of the tires on gravel. "Looks like we're the town's new ghost story," Ethan said. Axel turned his head slightly, eyes meeting his. The look was steady, almost reproachful. "All right," Ethan sighed. "Not the first time people thought we were trouble." The cabin came into view at the end of the narrow track. Its dark shape stood against the pale snow like something unearthed from another century. As they stepped out, the air hit with a sharp bite. The forest was unnaturally still. Even the birds had gone silent. Ethan set down supplies, food, nails, a new padlock. Axel sniffed the perimeter, his body language shifting from relaxed to alert. He circled the porch, nose pressed to the wood, pausing at the base of one of the support beams. Then he froze, tail stiff, ears forward. Ethan followed his gaze. A patch of snow near the steps looked different, smooth yet recently disturbed. He crouched, brushing away the top layer with a gloved hand. Beneath it was the faint imprint of a boot tread, half covered but unmistakable. Someone had been here since the storm. Axel gave a low growl, deep and restrained, the kind that made the hair rise on Ethan's arms. "Yeah," Ethan said quietly. "I see it, too." He stood, scanning the tree line. The pines were tall and silent, their shadows long in the weak winter sun. No movement, no sound, but the air carried a feeling he recognized, a presence just beyond sight, watching. Ethan locked the door that night, adding a wooden plank across it. The fire burned strong, but the cabin still felt cold. Axel lay near the door, chin on his paws, eyes open. He didn't sleep. Ethan sat beside the window, reading one of the notebooks he'd found under the hearth. The handwriting was neat, deliberate. Henry Porter had filled its pages with names, dates, and chemical formulas Ethan didn't understand. The last entry stopped mid-sentence, as if the writer had been interrupted. The wind rattled the glass. From somewhere deep in the woods came a sound, not the moan of the wind, but something heavier, more deliberate. Axel's ears perked instantly. Ethan closed the notebook. "We're not alone, are we?" The dog's eyes glowed in the firelight, sharp and steady. For the first time since he'd left the army, Ethan felt the strange calm of preparation. Fear didn't sharpen him, it focused him. He reached over and rested a hand on Axel's shoulder. The dog's body was solid, warm, and ready. "Whatever's out there," Ethan whispered. They should have picked another cabin. Outside, snow began to fall again, soft at first, then heavy. The forest swallowed the sound of the world. Inside, 2 survivors waited, bound not by command but by trust. One man and the shadow that had never once left his side. Night returned to Aspen Ridge with a hush so deep it made the fire crackle sound like gunfire. The storm had moved east, leaving behind a bitter cold that crept through the chinks in the cabin walls. Ethan tossed another log into the hearth, sparks leaping like startled insects. The orange light flickered across the room, carving shifting shadows onto the rough pine walls. Axel moved through the cabin with quiet purpose, nose pressed close to the floorboards. He'd already done 2 slow circuits, sniffing each corner, each seam, pausing longest near the fireplace. Every time he passed it, his ears pricked forward and his tail stiffened slightly. The subtle signals of unease Ethan had learned to trust. "What's got your attention this time, huh?" Ethan asked, his voice low. Axel didn't respond. He never did in moments like this. His instincts turned inward, shutting out everything but scent and sound. He stepped closer to the stone hearth, nose twitching, then froze. The fur along his back lifted, a quiet wave of tension. Ethan set his coffee mug down, suddenly alert. The cabin was small, and every sound carried, the settling timbers, the faint groan of wind against the window panes. But beneath that, he heard something new. It was soft, deliberate, and strangely rhythmic. A faint tapping, like someone knocking from under the floor. He stood still, listening harder. It came again. Tap, tap, pause, tap. Probably the pipes. He muttered, even though there were no pipes. The cabin didn't have running water yet. Axel let out a single low growl, deep in his chest. He stepped closer to the hearth, nose to the stone. The sound stopped instantly. The silence that followed felt alive. Ethan crouched, pressing his hand against the cold floorboards. Nothing moved. The fire hissed, settling back into its steady burn. He exhaled slowly, trying to shake off the feeling of being watched. "Easy, boy," he whispered, more to himself than to Axel. "Old houses make noise. That's all it is." But Axel wasn't convinced. He lay down in front of the fireplace, chin resting on his paws, eyes fixed on the stones, as if guarding something unseen. Ethan stayed up later than he meant to, reading through another of Henry Porter's notebooks. The handwriting grew more erratic towards the final pages, lines crammed together in urgent scrawl. Porter wrote of unmarked barrels, of trucks arriving after dark, and a phrase that made Ethan frown. They come from the mountain, and they don't leave the same way. The words left a sour taste in his mouth. He closed the notebook, rubbed his temples, and looked at Axel. The dog hadn't moved. "Guess you're my night watch again," Ethan said softly. He stretched out on the narrow cot, boots still on, and let his eyes close. Sleep came in fragments, faces from the desert, the metallic taste of dust, the sound of helicopters fading into static. Then something else. A thud. He sat up fast, hand instinctively reaching for the handgun he kept on the crate beside the bed. Axel was already up, standing rigid, head low, staring at the window. Ethan turned off the lantern. The cabin fell into darkness except for the weak orange glow of the dying fire. He waited. The world outside was white and still. Then the sound came again, faint but deliberate. Crunching snow. Footsteps. Axel's growl deepened, vibrating the air. Ethan moved to the window, brushing away frost with his sleeve. Nothing. Just the moonlight on the snow. He waited longer, but the sound had stopped. He turned to Axel. "Probably a deer," he said, though he didn't believe it. The dog remained stiff for a long moment before finally lying back down, though his eyes never closed. When morning came, sunlight poured through the frosted glass, harsh and too bright. The storm had scrubbed the world clean, leaving a white sheet of silence across the valley. Ethan pulled on his coat and stepped outside, his boots sinking ankle-deep into the snow. The air bit his lungs, sharp and metallic. At first, everything looked untouched. Then he saw them. Footprints. They circled the cabin, clear, heavy prints that hadn't been there before. Someone had walked through the storm and stopped right beneath the window where he'd stood the night before. The tracks led from the tree line to the porch, and then vanished. Axel bounded out beside. Him, nose to the ground, tracing the path. He followed the tracks a few yards before stopping abruptly. He sniffed the air, head turning toward the woods. His ears pinned back, and he barked once, sharp, commanding, the kind of bark that meant warning, not fear. Ethan scanned the trees. The forest was dense, quiet. No movement, no sound. "Whoever you are," he muttered, "you picked the wrong cabin." He turned back toward the house, but Axel stayed where he was, standing at the edge of the clearing. The dog's gaze was locked on something deep within the trees. Ethan followed his line of sight, but saw only shadows. Then, for a split second, a glint of sunlight flashed on something metallic, like a lens or the edge of a car mirror, before it disappeared behind the pines. Ethan's breath caught. Someone was out there. He knelt beside Axel, hand resting on the dog's shoulder. "Let's head inside." Axel didn't move until Ethan tugged lightly at his collar. When they stepped back into the cabin, Ethan bolted the door, his mind racing. The sound under the floor, the footprints, the flash in the woods. They weren't random. Someone had been watching. He poured himself a fresh cup of coffee, hands trembling slightly, and sat near the window. Axel settled by the hearth again, ears alert. The silence returned, but it was different now. It felt staged, like the pause before a trigger pull. Ethan took a slow sip of coffee, eyes scanning the frost on the glass. "Looks like for a haunted place," he said quietly. "The living are the ones making noise." Axel lifted his head, ears flicking toward the wall. That faint tapping came again from beneath the floor, slower this time, like a heartbeat echoing through stone. Neither of them moved. They just listened. Outside, the forest held its breath. Inside, the cabin whispered back. By the third morning, the cold had settled into Ethan's bones like a second skin. He woke to the sound of Axel pacing near the front door, nails clicking softly against the wood. The dog wasn't restless. He was listening. Every few seconds, he'd stop, tilt his head towards the window, then resume his slow patrol. Ethan pulled on his jacket, poured coffee into a tin mug, and stepped outside. The air was sharp and clean, the kind that made breath visible. The snow glistened under a weak sun. The footprints from the night before were gone, swallowed by another dusting of white. For a moment it felt like the mountain had reset itself, erasing any sign of what had happened. He almost believed it until he saw the tire tracks. 2 sets coming from the road below. One led to his porch, the other led away. He crouched, running a glove over the pattern. It was fresh. Someone had come up here before dawn. The crunch of gravel behind him made him turn. A county sheriff's SUV eased up the drive, the gold star on the door dulled by dirt. When it stopped, the engine idled a little too long before shutting off. Sheriff Rickson climbed out, his heavy coat flapping in the wind. He was in his 60s, tall but stooped, with a face carved by cold and authority. The kind of man who'd spent too many years keeping small towns in line. "Mr. Cole," he said, voice low and even. "Mind if I come in for a minute?" Ethan nodded toward the porch. "You're already here." Rickson smiled faintly, the kind that didn't reach his eyes. He glanced at Axel, who stood at the top step, tail low, body tense. "That your dog?" "He's mine," Ethan said. Rickson studied the shepherd for a long moment. "Good-looking animal. Military?" "Yeah, retired, smarter than most people I know." Rickson chuckled under his breath but didn't step forward until Ethan gestured him inside. The moment the sheriff crossed the threshold, Axel moved to stand between them, silent but unwavering. Inside, the cabin smelled of pine and smoke. The fire was low, and light from the window painted thin stripes across the floor. Rickson took off his gloves, his eyes scanning the room, every corner, every shelf, the stone fireplace. He lingered there a little too long. "Cozy," he said finally. "Didn't figure anyone would buy this place, especially not a stranger. $500 is hard to argue with." Ethan replied. "That's one way to look at it." Rickson's tone shifted slightly. "Another way is to ask why it was that cheap in the first place." Ethan said nothing. The sheriff pulled out a folded photo from his coat pocket and placed it on the table. It was weathered, the corners curled from age. A man in his 40s, lean, with sharp eyes and a half-smile. "Name ring a bell?" Rickson asked. "Henry Porter, reporter out of Denver. Bought this cabin about 15 years ago. Came up here to write some story about the North Peak energy mines." Ethan picked up the photo. "And?" "He never finished the story," Rickson said. "Vanished one winter night. Search teams found his truck down the road. No body, no sign of struggle, just gone." Axel growled low, the sound vibrating through the small room. Rickson glanced at him, then back at Ethan. "I take it you've already found some of his things." Ethan's pulse quickened, but he kept his face calm. "Like what?" Rickson gestured toward the fireplace. "That hearth's newer than the rest of the cabin. Folks used to talk about him sealing something in there. Nobody ever proved it. Then the cabin changed hands a few times. Last owner didn't last 2 weeks before selling." "Why?" Ethan asked. Said he couldn't sleep. Kept hearing things. Said the floor knocked back. Ethan's throat tightened. Rickson slipped his gloves back on, his expression hardening. "Word of advice, Cole. Don't go digging into the past here. Aspen Ridge doesn't like when people stir up old ghosts." Axel barked once, loud and sharp, making both men flinch. He was staring straight at Rickson, teeth bared slightly, eyes locked. "Easy, boy," Ethan said quickly, but Axel didn't back down. Rickson watched him, then took a step towards the fireplace. "He's looking at the same damn spot Porter used to stare at." Ethan's patience thinned. "You got a point, Sheriff?" Rickson turned slowly. "Yeah, you're not from here, which means you don't understand how this town works. Let me make it simple. North Peak keeps this place running. You start asking questions about what happened to Porter, you'll find trouble you can't shoot your way out of." Ethan crossed his arms. "I didn't ask for a history lesson. I'm not giving one. Rickson said, I'm giving you a warning. He walked to the door, pausing just before stepping out. You're a soldier, right? You should know better than to fight battles you can't win. Ethan didn't answer. Rickson stepped outside, boots crunching on the snow. When his SUV disappeared down the road, silence reclaimed the valley. Ethan turned toward Axel, who was still standing guard by the hearth, muscles rigid. The firelight flickered across his eyes, turning them to molten amber. What was that about? Ethan muttered, You don't like the sheriff? Axel finally relaxed, but didn't lie down. Instead, he nosed the edge of the rug, pushing it aside to reveal the faint line of the floor seam that ran beneath the fireplace. Ethan sighed. We're not doing this again. He rubbed a hand over his face, frustration building. I get it. You think something's there, but this isn't Afghanistan. There's no bomb, no threat, just an old cabin and bad memories. Axel looked at him for a long moment, then padded away, settling by the window. The silence between them felt heavier than usual. Ethan grabbed his coat and stepped outside to clear his head. The air was colder now, the sky bruised with grey. Down the valley, the smoke from the sheriff's SUV exhaust still hung faintly over the road. He stared at it until it disappeared. Behind him, from inside the cabin, a single sound echoed. One sharp, hollow knock from under the floorboards. Axel barked once, deep and commanding. Ethan froze on the porch, pulse racing. Then, through the quiet of the forest, came another sound, the low hum of an engine idling somewhere among the trees. Someone hadn't left. He stepped back inside, shutting the door. Axel stood alert, facing the window. Their eyes met in the firelight. Looks like you were right again. Ethan whispered. The dog's ears flicked toward the hearth, where the faint smell of burned dust lingered. Somewhere beneath the floor, something shifted, slow, deliberate, and real. By late afternoon, the snow began to fall again, thicker than before, swallowing the mountains in white. The temperature dropped fast, the kind of cold that gnawed through walls and bone. Ethan stacked more wood into the fireplace, listening to the wind beat against. The windows like fists. The storm had a pulse, a rhythm, and inside the cabin, that rhythm began to sync with something else, the uneven thud that came from below. Axel paced near the hearth. His nails scraped the floor with quiet insistence. Every few minutes he'd stop, nose pressed to the same patch of stone at the base of the fireplace. His breathing came fast, fogging the air. Ethan tried to ignore it at first. He'd told himself the sheriff's story was just that, a story. People vanished in these mountains all the time, but the dog's agitation was different tonight. It wasn't curiosity. It was warning. What is it this time, huh? Ethan said, crouching beside him. Axel pawed at the edge of the hearth, nails clicking sharply on the mortar. A low growl rolled through his chest. He looked at Ethan, then back at the floor, as if telling him to look closer. Ethan leaned down, running his hand along the base of the stones. The surface was cold, but something about the texture made him pause. The mortar wasn't uniform, most of it was rough and crumbly, but a section near the center was smoother, newer. He grabbed the flashlight from the table and angled the beam along the seam. The difference was clear. Someone had sealed this part recently, at least more recently than the rest of the century-old cabin. Son of a... he muttered under his breath. Axel barked once, sharp and commanding. All right, Ethan said. Let's see what's got you worked up. He moved the fire grate aside and knelt again, the floor cold enough to sting through his jeans. He fetched the crowbar from behind the door and wedged it into the seam. The sound of metal against stone filled the room, followed by the dull crack of breaking mortar. The dog's growl deepened as the stone shifted slightly under the pressure. When it finally gave, Ethan pried the slab loose and pushed it aside. The space beneath was barely larger than a small storage pit, lined with rotted planks. A faint metallic scent rose from it, rust, oil, maybe something else. Axel whined softly, peering over the edge. Ethan aimed the flashlight inside. The beam caught on the corner of a metal box, grey and stained with time. He reached in, fingers brushing against cold steel, and lifted it out. It was heavier than he expected. The latch was corroded, but not locked. He hesitated. Outside, the wind howled harder, slamming the shutters against the wall. Somewhere in the distance, he thought he heard a car engine, a low hum swallowed quickly by the storm. "Who the hell's driving in this weather?" he whispered. Axel's head snapped toward the window, then back to Ethan. The message was clear. "Hurry!" Ethan flipped open the latch. Inside, everything was arranged with military precision. Small glass vials labeled by hand. A stack of notebooks, their edges yellowed. Folders tied with string. The top notebook bore a name in fading ink, Henry Porter. Ethan opened it, the first page, listed dates and coordinates. The next pages were filled with handwritten notes, sketches of the valley, chemical symbols, and measurements. He turned a page and found a line underlined twice. Water contamination, origin traced to North Peak Mine Shaft 3B. Soil samples confirm presence of arsenic, cadmium, and mercury compounds. Locals warned to stay silent. Ethan's heart pounded. He flipped further. A paragraph stopped him cold. "They threatened me today. Said if I publish, I'll end up in the mountain like the others. They're watching the cabin. If I don't make it out, someone will find this. Tell them it's in the water." The next page was blank. Ethan sat back, breath visible in the cold air. The fire crackled behind him, the only sound that proved the world was still turning. Axel stood beside him, eyes fixed on the open pit, ears twitching to sounds Ethan couldn't hear. "You were right," Ethan said quietly. "You always are." He set the notebook down and picked up one of the small vials. It was filled with cloudy water, a thin film floating at the top. He held it up to the light. Tiny particles shimmered inside like dust caught in a sunbeam. Outside, something slammed into the porch. Heavy, deliberate. Axel lunged toward the door, barking once, loud and fierce. Ethan killed the light, heart hammering. The cabin plunged into darkness except for the flicker of the fire. He moved slowly to the window and peeked through the crack in the curtain. The snow blurred everything beyond a few yards, but he saw movement, a dark shape near the tree line. Too tall to be an animal, too still to be human comfort. "Someone's out there," Ethan whispered. Axel's body was a coiled spring, every muscle alive. He stood between Ethan and the door, ready. Ethan backed away from the window, clutching the notebook. His mind raced through possibilities. Sheriff Rickson's warning, the North Peak name, the missing reporter, and now this. Whoever was out there wasn't a random stranger. They were here for the same reason Henry Porter had died for. The wind howled again, rattling the door. Axel's growl rumbled like thunder under his breath. Ethan slipped the notebook and the vials into his rucksack, pushing the stone slab halfway back over the pit. The last thing he needed was proof lying in plain sight. "Come on, boy," he whispered. "We need to be ready." Axel moved to the door, body pressed low, waiting for a command that never had to be spoken. The firelight danced across his fur, turning his silhouette into something almost spectral. Ethan stood beside him, staring at the faint boot prints that began forming again in the snow outside. Slow, deliberate steps coming closer. He reached for his rifle. The world outside had gone white, silent, and watching. And beneath the stone floor of the cabin, the truth finally breathed again. By late afternoon, the storm had passed, leaving behind a sky so pale it seemed to hold its breath. The world outside was buried in white, and the air carried that strange, electric stillness that comes after violence. Ethan stood by the cabin window, coffee cooling in his hand, watching the road that wound down through the trees. Axel was pacing again, slow and deliberate, head low. Every few steps he stopped, staring toward the woods, ears twitching. His instincts hadn't relaxed since the night before. The dog could sense tension like a scent. Ethan was still going over Henry Porter's notes, trying to make sense of the data, when Axel suddenly froze. His body went rigid, one paw lifted. A faint rumble drifted through the cold air, the sound of an approaching engine. Ethan set his mug down and stepped onto the porch. Down the trail, a black SUV crept through the snow, tires biting into the frozen path. It was out of place here. New, spotless, the kind of vehicle no one in Aspen Ridge could afford. Axel growled softly beside him. The SUV stopped 20 yards away. The driver's door opened and a man climbed out, tall and composed, despite the biting wind. He wore a charcoal coat, black gloves, and sunglasses that didn't belong in this kind of light. He walked toward the cabin with the ease of someone who expected to be welcomed. "Afternoon," the man called out, his voice smooth, practiced. "Mind if I come closer?" Ethan didn't answer. His hand stayed near the doorframe where his rifle leaned. The man smiled. "Name's Silas Ward. I run North Peak Energy. You've probably heard of us." Ethan's jaw tightened. "Yeah, I've heard." Ward nodded as if the response pleased him. "Good, saves me the introduction. I was driving through the area and thought I'd stop by. Beautiful piece of land you've got here." "Didn't know North Peak was in the business of small talk," Ethan said. Ward's smile didn't move. "I'm in the business of opportunities. This cabin sits on a patch of ground we've been interested in for years. I figured I'd make an offer. Buy it off you. No fuss, no lawyers. I'll pay 5 times what you spent." Ethan looked him over. The man's coat was too clean, his shoes untouched by snow. The kind of man who'd never chopped his own wood, never spent a night without heat. "I'm not selling," Ethan said flatly. Ward tilted his head. "You might want to reconsider. Land up here comes with complications. Old titles, strange rumors. Would be a shame if you got caught up in someone else's mess." Axel stepped forward, placing himself between Ethan and the stranger. His lips curled, a low growl building deep in his chest. Ward glanced at the dog, his smile thinning. "Beautiful animal. Military breed, right? Shame they don't always know when to stand down." "Axel knows plenty," Ethan said. "More than most men." Ward's eyes hardened for a fraction of a second before he chuckled, brushing snow from his gloves. "You've got some spine, Mr. Cole. I'll give you that. But there are things in these hills that don't care how brave you are." "Is that a threat?" "Call it advice," Ward said. "Some secrets are meant to stay buried. You start digging, and they tend to pull people down with them." He turned, heading back to his SUV. "Think about my offer. I won't make it twice." The engine roared to life, tires spinning before gripping the frozen ground. The SUV disappeared down the road, leaving only a trail of exhaust hanging in the cold. Ethan stood there, the wind cutting through his jacket, the silence around him deeper than before. Inside, Axel was still tense, pacing near the fireplace. He barked once, sharp and warning. "I know," Ethan said quietly. "That wasn't a friendly visit." He grabbed one of the vials Porter had collected and held it to the light. The water inside shimmered faintly, almost iridescent. "They killed him for this," he muttered. "And now they're watching us." Outside, daylight faded fast. The snow turned from white to grey, and shadows stretched long across the clearing. Ethan checked the windows, the locks, the door. He could feel the paranoia clawing at him, but Axel's unease made it real. The dog was trained to read threats, He wasn't wrong. When darkness fell, the temperature plummeted. The wind returned in short bursts, pushing snow against the windows. Ethan was tightening the shutters when Axel's bark shattered the quiet. It was different this time, urgent, furious. Ethan rushed to the door. "What is it?" Axel darted toward the truck parked near the tree line, nose to the ground, growling. Ethan followed, flashlight cutting across the snow. Then he saw it. The front tire of his pickup sagged flat against the frozen dirt, rubber shredded clean through. The other front tire was the same. A thin line had been carved across each one, precise, deliberate. A knife cut. Ethan's breath turned to smoke in the cold. He crouched, running his fingers along the slice. Whoever did it knew how to move quietly, knew exactly what they were doing. Axel sniffed around the vehicle, then stopped near the hood, tail stiff. He growled low, nose pressed against a smear on the fender. A handprint, faint but visible, grease and blood mixed. "Damn it," Ethan whispered. He scanned the woods, flashlight sweeping across the trees. Nothing but darkness. The only sound was the wind whispering through the pines, carrying something that almost sounded like laughter. Ethan's pulse hammered in his ears. He straightened, gripping the flashlight tighter. They wanted to send a message. Axel stood beside him, body rigid, watching the tree line. Snowflakes caught in his fur like sparks. Ethan exhaled slowly. Message received. They went back inside, locking the door behind them. Axel took his place near the window again, his silhouette steady in the flickering firelight. Ethan sat at the table, staring at the notebook Porter had left. Behind, the one filled with warnings no one had listened to. Outside, the black SUV's tire tracks were already vanishing under new snow, as if the mountain itself was trying to erase what had happened. But Ethan knew better. Some threats didn't fade with the weather. Some just waited for nightfall. Axel turned his head suddenly, ears pricked toward the woods. A single bark echoed from his chest, sharp, commanding. Ethan looked up, his hand instinctively finding the rifle. In that frozen moment, man and dog shared the same thought. The real storm hadn't even started yet. The storm rolled in without warning, a wall of white swallowing the horizon. The wind howled through the pines like something alive, carrying with it the sound of breaking branches and distant thunder. Inside the cabin, the fire was dying, its glow fading to dull embers. Ethan moved to add more wood, but Axel's sudden growl froze him mid-step. The dog stood near the window, body stiff, head low. His ears flicked toward the wind, catching something Ethan couldn't yet hear. "What is it?" Ethan whispered. Axel turned sharply toward the back of the cabin, toward the door that opened to the woods. Then the first sound came. Faint, deliberate, wrong. Not the random crack of falling ice, but footsteps crunching snow, slow and spaced. More than one pair. Ethan's pulse kicked into high gear. He crossed to the table, where his rifle leaned against the leg. The world outside was a blur of white, impossible to see through, but the storm carried the kind of silence that amplifies danger. Axel moved to the door, nose pressed against the wood, a low growl rumbling in his throat. Then a sudden flash of light outside, a reflection, a lens, maybe a scope. "Down!" Ethan hissed. The next second, a gunshot cracked through the storm. The front window exploded inward, shards of glass scattering across the room. Axel barked once, lunging toward the sound, his instincts faster than thought. Ethan dropped behind the table, rifle in hand, scanning the windows. Another shot tore through the wall. He caught a shadow moving between the trees, a figure dressed in white camouflage, mask pulled high. Then another to the right. 3, he muttered, counting their spacing. Maybe 4. Axel darted toward the back wall, barking sharply, once, twice. Not random, signals. Ethan had learned them back in the desert. 2 short barks meant flank. "Copy that," Ethan said, breath steaming in the cold air. He moved to the back door and pushed a wooden chest in front of it. Bullets ripped through the outer wall, splintering wood. The cabin shook under the barrage. "Ward sent them," Ethan whispered. "He's cleaning house." Axel growled again, then stopped abruptly, head tilting. He moved to the small vent near the floor and sniffed hard. Then he looked back at Ethan, eyes sharp, focused. "You smell something?" The dog gave a short whine, then pressed his paw against the vent. Ethan knelt, prying it open. A narrow crawl space led under the cabin, a maintenance tunnel he hadn't noticed before. Porter must have used it to hide or escape. "Good boy," Ethan said. "That's our advantage." The next shot hit the door frame, sending splinters across his face. Ethan wiped the blood from his cheek, shoved Porter's notebooks into his pack, and slung it over his shoulder. "Axel, with me." They slipped into the crawl space, the world above them vibrating with gunfire. The tunnel smelled of damp earth and old wood. Ethan crawled forward, rifle slung across his back. Axel moved ahead, silent, only the faint sound of his paws against dirt. They reached the far end, where a small hatch opened behind the tree line. Ethan pushed it up slowly, peering through the snow. The attackers were spread out in a half circle around the cabin. 4 men, 1 on overwatch, 2 flanking, 1 covering the road. All armed. Professional, Ethan whispered, but sloppy in the cold. Axel's ears twitched. He turned his head towards the far right flank, where one of the masked men was kneeling, checking his weapon. The dog's body tensed, muscles coiled like a spring. Ethan didn't need to speak. He gave a quick hand signal. "Hold! Wait!" The man shifted his weight, unaware of the predator in the snow 10 feet away. Axel lunged. He hit with the full force of a missile, jaws clamping down on the man's forearm. The rifle went flying. The attacker screamed, struggling, but Axel didn't let go. He dragged the man down, snow spraying in every direction. Ethan sprinted forward, using the chaos. He tackled the second man, slamming his rifle butt into the mask, then ripped it off. The man's eyes were wide with panic. "Who sent you?" Ethan barked. The man coughed, spitting blood. "Ward, he wants it gone. All of it. The files, the dog, you, everything!" Another shot rang out, missing Ethan by inches. He rolled, grabbed the man's pistol, and fired back toward the third shooter. The bullet found its mark. A dark figure collapsed into the snow. Axel stood over the subdued attacker, growling low but steady. The dog's chest rose and fell with heavy breaths, steam curling from his muzzle. Ethan moved beside him, keeping his rifle trained on the woods. The wind had turned to a shriek now, visibility almost 0. "You picked the wrong night," Ethan said to the man on the ground. "And the wrong dog." The attacker groaned, but said nothing. Ethan pulled a small radio from his pack, an old field comms unit, still functional from his service days. Static filled the air until a faint voice broke through. "Clara Reyes," came the voice on the other end, crisp and tired. "It's Ethan. I need a favor." "Cole, Jesus, it's been years. You sound like hell." "Long story. Listen, I've got something. Files, samples, a whole damn cover-up tied to North Peak Energy. Porter was right. They killed him for it. I need these in the right hands." There was a pause. "You're saying this is real?" "Too real. And they're coming for me next. Send what you can. I'll alert my editor. Get safe." The line crackled, then went silent. Ethan exhaled, tucking the radio away. He turned back to Axel, who was watching the tree line, fur dusted with snow. "You just gave us a fighting chance, partner." Axel's tail moved once, barely perceptible, but the meaning was there. The wind eased for a moment, revealing the cabin in the distance, half collapsed, smoke curling from the roof. The snow around it was stained dark. Ethan tightened his pack and looked down at the captured man. "Tell Ward," he said quietly. "Some secrets don't stay buried." Axel barked once, sharp and certain. The sound cut through the storm like a vow. Together they vanished into the white, man and dog moving in perfect sync, every step guided not by fear, but by trust rebuilt in fire and snow. The night was a maelstrom of wind and snow. The forest around Aspen Ridge had turned into a living, breathing thing, moaning, cracking, and whispering in the darkness. Ethan and Axel were holed up inside what was left of the cabin, nursing exhaustion and adrenaline in equal measure. The fire in the hearth had burned low, casting a dim orange glow across the scarred walls. Axel rested near the door, one ear twitching at every gust of wind. The snow had begun to ease, but the quiet that followed wasn't peaceful. It was watchful. Ethan checked his rifle, then the shortwave radio Clara had used to confirm the upload of Porter's files. "She's got them," he murmured. "They'll go public in hours." Axel lifted his head, eyes bright amber in the fading light. "Yeah, I know," Ethan said, glancing at him. "Ward's not going to let it end here." As if summoned by the thought, headlights appeared through the trees, a black SUV, then another. Engines cut through the cold, idling low. Ethan's stomach dropped. "Showtime." Axel stood, growling softly, body tight with focus. Ethan moved to the back of the cabin, dousing the fire with snow. The sudden darkness wrapped around them like a cloak. Through the broken window, he could see shadows moving. 4, maybe 5 men. One voice rose above the rest, low, commanding, unmistakable. Silas Ward. "Check the perimeter," Ward ordered. "We do this clean. I want everything burned, every page, every drop of evidence, gone." Ethan's grip tightened on his rifle. He and Axel exchanged a glance. There was no fear in the dog's eyes, only readiness. The first Molotov hit the porch with a sharp crack. Flames bloomed across the wood, licking up the walls. The second smashed through the window, scattering fire across the floor. In seconds, the cabin roared to life, orange and furious. "Move!" Ethan shouted. Axel darted toward the back door, barking twice. The smoke was thick already, filling the air with the choking stench of burning pine and oil. Ethan threw his arm over his mouth, coughing hard. The heat was unbearable. Flames climbed the walls, devouring the cabin inch by inch. The roof creaked, sagged. Axel pressed against the rear door, barking again, one deep, commanding sound that snapped Ethan into action. He kicked the lock, once, twice, then a third time. The wood splintered and gave way. Cold air rushed in as the two burst into the snow, swallowed by the storm. Gunfire erupted behind them, 3 sharp cracks that echoed across the valley. Bullets tore through branches, biting into the snow near Ethan's feet. He dove behind a fallen log, dragging Axel down beside him. Ward's voice carried through the wind. "You can't run from this, Cole. You're already dead." Ethan lifted his head just enough to see Ward emerging from the flames, his coat glowing in the firelight. He moved with slow precision, pistol drawn. Behind him, 2 men swept the clearing with flashlights, their beams cutting through the snow like blades. Axel growled, low and steady, eyes locked on Ward. "Stay," Ethan whispered. But Axel didn't stay. He crouched low, tail stiff, muscles quivering. He could smell the threat, feel the tension radiating from his handler. And when Ward raised the pistol, aiming straight at Ethan, Axel broke from cover. He hit the snow like a launched arrow, grey and silver fur blurring against the storm. Ward saw the movement too late. Axel slammed into his chest, teeth sinking into the arm that held the gun. The weapon fired once, the shot wild, disappearing into the trees. Ward shouted, twisting, trying to break free, but Axel's jaws were iron. The other gunman spun, firing wildly into the chaos. Ethan rose from behind the log and fired 2 clean shots. The first man dropped instantly. The second stumbled backward, rifle clattering into the snow. "Axel!" Ethan shouted. The dog released his grip and leapt back toward cover, but not fast enough. Ward fired again, one desperate, panicked shot. The bullet grazed Axel's side, cutting through fur and flesh. The dog yelped, stumbled, but didn't fall. He turned, blood staining the snow beneath him, and placed himself squarely between Ethan and Ward. His teeth bared, breath steaming in the freezing air. Ward raised his pistol once more, voice shaking with rage. "You should have taken the money, Cole." Ethan didn't answer. He was watching something beyond Ward, something coming from above. A low, rhythmic thump grew louder. Then, through the blizzard, a beam of light swept across the forest, blinding and white. A helicopter, dark, unmarked, descended over the clearing. Loudspeakers crackled to life. "Federal agents, drop your weapons." Ward froze, disbelief written across his face. Ethan lowered his rifle slightly, relief and exhaustion washing over him all at once. The signal had worked. Clara had done her job. Ward turned toward the chopper, gun still raised, but before he could fire, Axel lunged again, knocking him off balance. The pistol went off, the bullet slicing through the air above Ethan's shoulder. Ward hit the ground hard, and Axel stood over him, growling deep enough to shake the snow. Within seconds, agents in tactical gear stormed the clearing, weapons trained. Ward's men dropped theirs and surrendered. The CEO of North Peak Energy, the man who had poisoned half the valley and buried the truth, lay in the snow with a bleeding arm and a loyal dog's teeth inches from his throat. One agent approached Ethan. "Sir, stand down. We've got him." Ethan knelt beside Axel. The dog was trembling, his fur matted with blood, but his eyes were steady, unbroken. Ethan pressed his hand to the wound. "Easy, buddy. You did it. You hear me? You did it." Axel gave a weak whine, licking Ethan's glove. His tail moved once, faint but sure. As the FBI agents cuffed Ward and pulled him to his feet, the fire behind them consumed the last of the cabin. Sparks rose into the night like ghosts taking flight. Ethan looked up at the sky, grey, churning, alive, and whispered, "It's over." But Axel's gaze stayed fixed on the burning wreckage, as if he knew better, as if he understood that some battles never really end, they just change shape. In the cold glow of the helicopter lights, with snow and ash falling together, man and dog stood side by side, scarred but unbroken, their breath rising in the frozen air like a single vow. They would never stop guarding the truth. Morning came quietly, the kind of grey dawn that made the forest look frozen in time. The fire had long since died, leaving only a column of smoke, curling from what used to be Ethan's cabin. Snow covered everything in a thin, clean layer, like the mountain itself was trying to hide the scars from the night before. Ethan stood beside an unmarked SUV at the edge of the clearing, watching federal agents sift through the wreckage. Pieces of melted metal and charred wood lay half-buried under ice. Every now and then, an investigator called out a number, tagged another fragment, took another photo. Axel lay nearby on a wool blanket, his torso wrapped in gauze. His breathing was slow but steady. When the wind picked up, he lifted his head slightly, nose twitching toward the smell of pine and smoke. "Easy, boy," Ethan murmured, kneeling beside him. "You're still on duty leave?" Axel's tail gave a faint thump. It wasn't much, but it was enough. An FBI agent approached, Special Agent Clara Reyes. Her hair was tucked under a grey beanie, her breath visible in the cold. She held a clipboard in one hand, but her eyes softened when she looked at Axel. "How's the hero?" she asked. "Stubborn as ever," Ethan replied. "He'll be fine. Just needs rest." Clara crouched down, scratching behind Axel's ear. "You did good, soldier." Axel blinked slowly, leaning into her touch. "They confirmed it," Clara said, turning back to Ethan. "The water samples Porter collected match contamination from North Peak's old drilling sites. They've been dumping chemicals into the groundwater for over 15 years. Half the county's been drinking it." Ethan looked away, jaw tightening. "And Ward?" "In custody, facing multiple counts: corporate manslaughter, fraud, conspiracy to obstruct federal investigation. His lawyers won't get him out of this one." She paused. "And Sheriff Rickson? He's next. Turns out he was on North Peak's payroll for years, keeping complaints buried. The Bureau's already seized his accounts." Ethan nodded, the information landing with quiet weight. "So that's it." "Not quite," Clara said. "You'll get credit for this, Ethan. The Bureau's going to want a statement. Reporters, too. They're calling you a whistleblower." He gave a tired laugh. "No, Clara. Henry Porter was the whistleblower. I just listened to a dog." Clara smiled faintly. "Then maybe that's the story they need to hear." She handed him a file envelope. "These are the copies you sent me. Originals are with the Bureau. Thought you might want to keep something." Ethan took it, the paper edges still cold from the mountain air. He stared at the faded handwriting on the top page, the last words Porter had written. "If someone finds this, tell the truth, even if it's too late for me." He folded the note back into the envelope and tucked it inside his coat. Guess it wasn't too late after all. Clara stood, glancing towards the charred remains of the cabin. "You rebuilding?" Ethan looked out at the ruins. The land was quiet now, the snow falling soft as breath. "Not here. The cabin's done its job." "And you?" "I'll stick around until he's healed," Ethan said, looking at Axel. "After that, we'll see." Clara nodded. "If you ever change your mind, the Bureau could use people like you. Or maybe the press could use more people like Porter." He smiled, shaking his head. "I've had enough wars, Clara. The mountain's quieter." She hesitated, then said softly, "Porter would have liked you." Ethan didn't answer. He didn't need to. When Clara left, silence took its place again. The last of the federal vehicles disappeared down the trail, leaving only the whisper of snow falling on ash. Ethan crouched beside Axel and brushed a bit of soot from his muzzle. "You saved me again, partner. Hell, you saved all of us." Axel's eyes closed halfway, his breathing deep and calm. He let out a small huff, almost a sigh. Ethan sat there for a long time, listening to the forest breathe. He thought of the nights in Afghanistan, dust storms instead of snow, gunfire instead of wind, and how the same dog had been beside him then too. Different world, same loyalty. He stood and looked once more at the place where the cabin had stood. Only the stone base remained, blackened but solid. The snow had started to melt along the edges, revealing the carved initials HP etched into one corner. Porter had built that hearth himself. Ethan took a knife from his belt and added 2 more letters next to it. AC. "Guess you get your name in history too," he said quietly. As the sun broke through the clouds, the smoke from the ruins thinned into pale ribbons against the sky. The air smelled of pine sap and thawing snow. Axel stirred, tail sweeping once across the blanket. His eyes followed the smoke rising upward, as if he understood that somewhere above it all, the truth had finally found its way out. Ethan knelt beside him, resting a hand on his back. "Rest easy, boy. We did what we came here to do." And for the first time in years, the veteran felt something settle inside him. Not peace exactly, but the faint, steady beginning of it. Above the ashes, the truth finally breathed. By late spring, the snow on Aspen Ridge had finally surrendered to the thaw. Streams of melted ice cut through the valley like silver veins, feeding the pine roots that had survived the long winter. The mountain smelled alive again. Wet earth, sap, and smoke from the small fire that burned outside Ethan's rebuilt cabin. He'd chosen to rebuild on the same foundation, right over the ashes of what had been destroyed. Some of the old stones still bore black scorch marks, but Ethan left them that way. He said it made the place honest. Axel rested on the porch, his head lifted just enough to follow the quiet movement of the forest. His fur had grown back where the bullet had grazed him, though a faint scar still traced along his ribs. To Ethan, it wasn't a wound. It was proof. "You watching again?" Ethan asked softly, stepping out with 2 mugs of coffee. One for himself, one left steaming near Axel's paw, a habit from the long patrols overseas. Axel blinked slowly, then looked back toward the trees. The wind stirred the grass, carrying faint echoes of life. An elk call far off, the wingbeat of a crow, the river running somewhere below. The mountain had gone back to silence, but a different kind of silence now, the kind that meant peace had returned. Ethan sat on the steps beside his partner. The rebuilt cabin was smaller, simpler. No electricity yet, just a wood stove and a few shelves. On one of them sat the weathered notebook of Henry Porter, sealed in glass. Above it hung a photograph, a black and white shot of Ethan and Axel from their deployment in Kandahar. Sometimes Ethan caught himself talking to the empty air, as if Porter or his fallen squad mates might still be listening. Sometimes he swore he could hear their voices carried on the wind. He looked down at Axel. "They think we're done," he said, a faint smile tugging at his mouth. "Guess they don't know you." Axel's tail brushed the porch once, then twice. That afternoon, a local journalist from Aspen Ridge came by, a young woman named Molly Crane. She wanted to write a piece about the veteran and his German shepherd who exposed the mountain secret. Ethan had declined the first few requests, but this time he let her in. "You don't mind me asking?" Molly said, flipping through her notebook. "Why'd you stay here, after everything?" Ethan looked past her, to the place where the old cabin had burned. "Because this land deserves someone watching over it, someone who listens when it whispers." Molly smiled. "And the dog?" Ethan glanced at Axel, who had shifted closer to the door, ears flicking as if he understood every word. "He's not guarding the cabin," Ethan said. "He's guarding the truth." That night, after Molly left, Ethan took a wooden board he'd carved himself and nailed it to the front porch. The letters were burned into the grain, simple and unpolished. He didn't bark for food. He barked for the truth. When the wind blew through the trees, the sign creaked softly, like it was whispering those words back to the forest. Ethan leaned against the doorway, arms crossed. "You think people understand that?" he asked. Axel gave a small, rumbling sound that might have been agreement. "Yeah," Ethan said quietly. "Me too." The sun dipped behind the ridge, painting the sky in copper and violet. Down in the valley, the first lights of the small town flickered on. Somewhere out there, Clara Reyes was likely still writing, still digging, still holding Ward and his empire accountable. The world would move on, but the mountain, the cabin, and the dog would remain exactly as they were, steady, silent, unyielding. As the stars began to scatter across the sky, Ethan reached down, running a hand over Axel's fur. The dog sighed, content, his eyes half closed but still watching. Always watching. "Sometimes," Ethan said softly, "miracles don't come with thunder. They come on 4 tired legs, carrying loyalty through the snow." He stayed there long after dark, listening to the sound of the forest settling into sleep. The fire crackled low, and Axel's breathing fell into a slow, steady rhythm beside him. In the morning, they would hike down to the stream, maybe fix the fence, maybe do nothing at all. But for tonight, man and dog kept their quiet watch, side by side under the whispering pines. And as the screen fades to black, Ethan's voice lingers. What's your story with a loyal pet? If you've ever shared your life with a dog who stood by you through storms, who saw what no one else could, share their story. Subscribe to German Shepherd Stories, where loyalty never fades and every bark still carries the truth.